Good morning, everyone, and welcome to our third issue of Talking to the Board. I'm Jerry Murphy, Senior Vice President of Research and Consulting for Nemertes. I'm here with Beth Boucher, a Nemertes Research Fellow. Just to really quickly recap, our first talk that we had, we sort of were going through what is motivating this issue of how do we get people to talk to boards better? And we basically did a research study finding that essentially IT executives were 30% less effective speaking to the board than other executives that were talking to the board. So we really first went through why is that? What is the problem? What is the challenge with people speaking to the board? And what are some of the shortcomings and things that people need to do better to be more effective? Then the second session, Beth and Jonathan Johnson had a discussion about sort of as you're going to do presentations, what works, what doesn't work, and what are some of the things that people need to think about to present effectively. In this final presentation, Beth and I are going to talk about 10 principles on what would be the perfect presentation. And with that, Beth, I think we can just jump right into some of your points on what makes a perfect presentation.
Well, thank you, Jerry, and good morning, good afternoon, good day to everyone. As Jerry mentioned, I'm Beth Boucher. I'm a fellow with Nemertes. In addition, I'm a board director and chair of several committees, as well as a fractional part-time CIO with 40 partners. So I'm delighted to continue this discussion with episode 3 today. What you're going to see here is a distillation of the knowledge and experience that I have as a CIO, Jerry as a CEO, and also board membership, in addition to knowledge out in the environment from organizations such as NACD, which is the National Association of Corporate Directors, as well as from the board side of some of the top auditing firms, EY, PwC, for example, as well as other insights from McKinsey or Russell Reynolds. So it's really a compilation of some top tips for presenting to boards effectively. So with that said, why don't we go ahead and jump in? So the first and easily the most effective tool that you have in your toolbox is to prep. Now that sounds obvious, right? What do we mean by prep? So I think the first thing is, and we mentioned a little bit about this in episode 2, but prep, know your audience, understand who's on the board, what is their history, what industry are they from, what committee are they on, what publications have they done, what interactions have they had with the board already, what is their style of preference, what's their communication style. So know about the audience. That's the first one. I think the second one is make effective use of your pre-read materials. Most board members will read the materials in advance. And so you should have an executive summary. Maybe it's a 2-paragraph Word document that summarizes exactly what you're going to present to the board and what your objectives are. Make sure that that's in your pre-read so that they're coming into the room with a knowledge of where you're going. And I think the third one is rehearse your content. Get ready, go through it, anticipate questions, be ready to adapt on your feet. Sometimes you can get in there and find out you really only have 5 minutes and you thought you had 20. So be ready to pivot and adapt depending on the temperature in the room and the situation that you're walking into.
I'll tell you, my experience, Beth, is oftentimes, and it's a two-edged sword. My company and our board, I was very fortunate. We were very successful financially. Usually, and my company was a subsidiary of a larger company, so I would be presenting to the board of the larger company. Mm-hmm. Usually on the agenda, my company's statistics was one of the last things to present. Theoretically, I had 20 minutes, but inevitably they'd run over talking about some critical issue for the parent company, mm-hmm. and inevitably I'd run into 5 minutes. So it's like, okay, you have 20 slides.
Never mind.
The first 1 or 2. So usually the good news was we had things up front. But one thing that I can't overemphasize my own experience is meeting directors, meeting the chairs. there's nothing can be so intimidating if you're an IT executive presenting the board, and all of a sudden you're getting this room. Sometimes they got these very long tables that have
Very
15,
formal.
20 people around them, as much as usually 12, right?
Yeah.
But you're sitting there presenting, and now you get all these gray-haired guys and gals, and they're sitting there with their reading glasses, and they're looking at the notes, and their reading glasses are like this, and then their eyes are looking up at you like that. That could be a very intimidating thing
It's true.
if it's the first time you're ever doing that and you've never met these people. But the reality is, they're all people just like you or me. And so if there's a breakfast ahead of time, a lunch beforehand, sometimes they'll meet the night before and they'll have dinner or cocktail party before the meeting in the morning. Absolutely. One of the most critical things I ever did was take the time to meet these people before the meeting, just to find out, what do they like? What do they not like? Do they have a sense of humor? Do they not have a sense of humor? And just the fact that I know it's Bob, Tim, and Mary instead of Mr. Rucker and Mr. Charles and things like this. And just I could get a sense of what is it that they care about, what are they sensitive about, and just know them as people, so that when I then go to present to them, they're not strangers. And ideally, you're talking to friends is the ultimate goal that you want. But to me, that is, from my experience, is so important to actually try to take the time to know them, and not just there, but go on LinkedIn, figure out, hey, where's your board member from? What's their company like? What is their background? Maybe they went to a college that I know. Maybe they went to a college that my daughter or my wife went to. I can find some point of commonality. That kind of research is just as important in my mind as actually going over my slide deck.
I agree. In one case, I did some research on a board that I was presenting to, and I found out one of the board members actually was deeply technical. So that was great, because I knew I had a different ear in the audience for the discussion and someone that I could bring into the discussion. But if you're in a situation where, for whatever reason, you don't have access to those directors, that's okay. There are still ways to get the research, and talk to the executive team. Someone on that team has had a relationship with those board members. So talk to them. Maybe it's often the CFO, for example, would have a relationship with the audit committee, or the CEO. So use all the tools in your toolbox. Prep is the biggest, most effective tool that you have.
Hey, another person that's a great resource that I think is often underutilized, incredibly valuable, is the admin that works for the board. Sometimes the CEO's secretary or whoever it is might be usually there's some admin that is actually putting all the various different decks together. In my case, it was the CEO's admin of the parent company. I built a rapport with her as well. And very often that administrative assistant that's putting all the decks together may actually have a lot of insight too about, hey, who are the people that are the tough people? What should I know? What should I avoid doing? They can oftentimes have a lot of insight and are far less intimidating to approach maybe than the COO or the CEO as you're doing this prep work.
Well, and two other people, and then we'll move on. I think the corporate secretary sometimes serves that role. They very often have a lot of interaction with the board members for various reasons. So talk with them. And then finally, your audit partners. If you have a relationship with the audit partners, and many technology executives do, they have insights, at least for members of the risk committee or the audit committee. So I think there are a lot of different ways to get this information if you don't have access to it directly, which of course is preferred. Great. So let's move on to our second point here, which is, don't drag the board through pages of content till you get the big reveal. Out front, first slide, top 3 bullets, be very, very explicit about why are you there? Why are you using their time? Are you asking for funding? Are you looking to get a program approved? Are you providing an update? Are you alerting them to a risk? Are you seeking counsel and support? Whatever it is, up front, top 3 bullets, it should be there. Let them know what you're there for. And then go about building the case and the supporting content. In some cases, you may never get any further. That might be good and that might be bad, but sometimes you could, and I've done this. I went in, I had my top 3, and immediately there was a motion. So, we were done. We were done with that portion of the topic. I never had to get to those slides. And that will touch a little bit on the modular content in our next point. So you are very unlikely to get what you need and what you want for the organization if you don't ask. Think about it from the board perspective. They're going through hundreds of pages of documentation. They're cramming a lot of work into, usually one day, maybe a day and a half. Make it easy for them to consume. So that would be, something I would definitely emphasize.
No, that's a great point. And I would say I myself was probably guilty of having too much diarrhea of data before I got to what I wanted, right? Because very often, board meetings, you're meeting quarterly. My experience is we usually have quarterly meetings. Sometimes you'd have a special one if there was some special activity like selling your company or getting approval for some significant financial thing or something like that. But normally they were quarterly. There's an annual meeting. And so normally there was things I knew people wanted, right? I want data on stats. Like here's my earnings, my expenses, here's some operational statistics and da-da-da. But very often, because I had a standard format I do, the real ask, which was approval of budget, might actually be at the very bottom. I go through yada, 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 yada. And it's like,
flip that over.
Why are we here again?
Yeah. And you can tell, we'll talk later about this, but you can tell if the eyes are not on you, if the eyes are flipping through pages, if they're sort of looking around, you don't have their attention. And it's usually not because they're not interested. And I have never found that to be the case, actually. I'm sure it happens, but I've been fortunate. So, really make it explicit so that it's efficient, and then go about building the story if you need to.
Totally agree.
And that really ties to the third tip, which is when you build your content, you never ever get as much time as you're allocated. I've never had them say, "Hey, let's go a little longer on this." I just have not run into that experience because time is so short and there's a lot packed into that agenda. So be ready to do 5-minute, 10-minute, 20-minute version. Whatever your time is, shorten it by at least 10 minutes, and then be able to have, the 1-slide version, the 3-slide version, etc. At the same time, as you build that content, be ready to have modular content where you could deep dive into something that's important to your objective. So for example, let's say that you want to secure funding for a multi-year cybersecurity roadmap, and you want to provide an update on the latest program. Well, in likelihood, that first topic will be a fairly sizable number, and the board may want to probe a little bit deeper. Now, you don't need to bring that content into the main arena, but you should have it ready in case you want to be able to say, well, look, as I can demonstrate here on chart 6, on slide 7, the real takeaway here as it relates to funding is ABCD. So be ready to pivot around your own content, anticipate those questions. Granted, you'll do a lot of work and you may never get those slides to the board, but it's extremely effective. If you need them, they're ready, number one. Number two, it demonstrates your competence and your command of the content, and you're ready. So it's really part of being ready, but you have to do the legwork and make that content modular.
That's a great point, Beth. I've actually found personally that the more prepared I am, the more succinct I can make a point.
Exactly.
It's amazing how if I got something half baked, it actually takes me longer and I'm rambling and I'm not sure what my point is. If I really have something nailed, I can get to it very quickly. And what I do with that 5, 10, 20 is, in my mind, is what I do is I do bluff, detail, story. So that is bluff, bottom line up front. Mm-hmm. So the first thing I do is, here's what you need to know about this slide. Bang, in one sentence. And very often with a board, if they're busy, it's like, got it. And you just go to the next slide. You don't need to go anything. If I get puzzled looks or confusion, then I might go through some detail and say, okay, here's what I mean by that. A, B, C. And then usually that's sufficient. But if I'm either still getting questions or maybe I get pushback or I don't see it this way, then what I do is I'm prepared to tell a story. So I tend to be somebody who I live by analogies, right? So very often I will take something and I'll have in my mind a story that, especially if it's technical things, I'm talking to non-technical people, I'll have a story that's non-technical that hopefully people can relate to.
Resonate.
And if I've met people ahead of time and I know their likes and dislikes, I can have a story prepared that I know is going to be relevant to them, that can try to tie my technical point to them. So that's what I do. Bottom line up front, details, story if needed. And if I can have that for everything, I can be the most flexible. And then I tend to adapt my presentation based on the feedback cues I'm getting from the people I'm talking to.
You have to be able to pivot. And I love that acronym. That's really great. If we move on, I think the next item is, it's difficult for the board to come, in every quarter to a screeching halt, 200 pages, 2 days, day and a half of content, and recreate the wheel every time and get reoriented every time. So to the extent that your agenda allows you to do this, I would strongly suggest you leverage a consistent framework. So that you can build incremental knowledge and just change over time versus a brand new set of visuals, a brand new concept. And an example that I've used in the past is the NIST framework. So just focusing on cybersecurity. So I laid the foundation over a year and started, well, here's a framework. Here's what it means in layman's terms around our security protection. And here are some key concepts in each of those domains. And then quarter over quarter, instead of talking about the framework, we were able to talk about how we were protecting our business in that context. So maybe that's not the right framework for you, but I would suggest look for some way to have consistency over the year rather, and so that you can be focusing on the changes and the business impact of those on a quarterly basis, and not actually brand new charts, brand new concepts.
That's a great point, Beth. One of the things that I find a lot of times, especially in technical organizations, is how do I show somebody a performance metric of something that to somebody else may be abstract, right? And you think about all these indicators of performance, and it's like, I've got maybe a mean time to repair, number of licenses simultaneously issued. I've got all these metrics, and they may not mean anything to somebody, but I really believe measurement is the breakfast of champions, right? But the problem is, if you're constantly giving me a different metric every month, you're right. It's very confusing. One of the things that very often what I do is I have a weighted sum of things. And I'll take, a percentage of metric A with a percentage of metric B with a percentage of metric C. You add them all up together and you get a number 287. What does 287 mean? The answer it doesn't mean anything.
Yeah.
However, if I keep showing the board the sum of these different things, and then over time, what I want to do is show them high is good, low is bad. People get that, right? The sum of these things can either be a sum of good things, like, it was 9 out of 10 and 10 is good and 1 is bad, or vice versa. If I want things to be faster, maybe a lower number is like the time it takes to do something, I want a lower number. I don't care whether it's lower or bigger. Let's all agree whether lower is better or higher is better, but you have a baseline, and we measured it, and what we got was 287. I don't know whether 287 is good or bad, but we can agree that 300 is better or worse than 200.
Yeah, directionally.
Track it over time. And so what our goal is to improve our performance by 20%. And now I can track all those things. And the first time I saw it, we said, I don't know what 287 is. But now 6 months later, hey, we went from 287 to 300 to 350. We're getting better.
Our trend line is good.
Our trend line is going up. Or now this month it drops. What happened? Why did it go down? And now we have something we can talk about that's concrete.
As opposed to...
But I measured it and I trended over time. And the fact that I gave people something and they got used to it, now over time, they're used to this metric. And I understand, hey, we're getting better, we're getting worse. Even though the individual things I was counting might have been abstract, I understand that they all should be getting better.
Yeah, and if you contrast that to every quarter, there's a brand new set of metrics and a brand new set of charts. It's like, well, wait, what happened to the last set? What
Yeah,
what about that? Are we changing are we changing so it's helpful to stay consistent because it eliminates unnecessary friction in the dialogue, right? And that's really what you want. You want to convey things, and so think about methodologies, frameworks, whatever it is, so that you can have that consistency and build on the education of the board over time. How KPIs relate to business performance. The last item here I'll talk about is using board language. So everything that you talk about should be in the context of your business. Don't assume that all of the board members have your industry knowledge. They may not. In many cases, they don't. So you need to be explicit in the translation and discuss how the initiatives that you're talking about contribute to user experience, UX, or customer experience, CX. How will these provide an impact to your business model? Will they help you provide competitive differentiation? Do they enable new models? Do they accelerate your time to market? Do they reduce your risk? So these are not technology terms. These are business terms. And those are the terms that you need to be using when you're in that room, because that is the language of the board. That is their responsibility. So be very conscious about, yes, your topic is technology and your acumen is technology, but you really need to be explicit around the translation. Use the right language.
totally agree. And one of the things um, I found was sometimes I would get frustrated as a technical person thinking, why does the board not get this technology? I try to explain it to them, but the reality is it's not my job to explain technology to the board. It's my job to say, why is what I'm doing, why does it matter to the company? Why is
Right.
what you're doing, is it saving us money? Is it getting us more revenue? Is it getting me into new markets? Is it lowering my risk? Show me. It's my job to show the board how what I'm doing is relevant to them. It's not their job to figure out, why do I need to understand quadrature phase shift keying
Yeah.
for, QPSK signaling. They just don't know,
You
they
know,
don't care. And I may need to do that really well so that I can do it better than somebody else to, sell better wireless handsets, but the board doesn't need to know that.
no, they
But
don't.
I need to know, how does QPSK signaling, lower my costs, make me have a better quality so that I'm going to get more customers. That's what, I need to think of. And so often as technical people, we get so lost into because we feel the importance of, hey, this stuff is important. I spent a lot of time
This is
going
my
to
life.
college learning how to do all this incredibly complicated stuff. you know Great, show me how it makes me money.
What does it mean? Now, I do think there are cases where board education is important, but here again, be explicit about it. So, in one case, I did a primer for the audit committee around cyber. That was a request that they had. But what we did was we put it in the context of business risk, right? And how do you mitigate risk, and where is your risk appetite, and how do you think about cyber insurance? So
Right.
we built business related dimensions around that topic, while at the same time creating a baseline foundation for them to understand at their request. And that was an explicit agenda around education.
That's
And
great.
there's a place for that.
I totally agree.
Okay, so let's move on then. The next one I think will be near and dear to you, Jerry, because I know working with you, this is really in your wheelhouse. And I think you're not there to do a presentation per se. Really think about crafting a narrative. Think about telling and painting a story or a vision of, here's where we are now and here's what it would look like in the future, depending on your agendas. Minimize the slides, the charts, the graphics. You do need to be fact-based and database, but actually what you want out of that 10, 15, 20-minute interaction is an interaction. You want engagement. You want them to be focused on you, not the slides. You should be so well versed in that community, in your agenda, and in your content that if all the electronics go down, you can still successfully pull through that conversation in an engaging way in alignment with your objectives. So use that rare time that you have with those individuals in the room to pull them into your conversation. Pull them into the conversation, ask questions, listen carefully to what's underneath their questions, and have a story. A story is the most effective way to do that, to get people to sort of put the slides aside and be focused on you and what you're talking about. And you then can do the same thing with each of those individuals.
Yeah, Beth, that's really significant. The way you said that, I was really struck by so often when I'm making a presentation and I'm making a particular slide, in my mind is, how can I make a slide that somebody's going to look at the slide and go, wow, that's a cool slide. But the reality is, what I should be thinking about is they'd be going, wow, isn't Jerry cool? Doesn't he have a compelling point?
Yeah.
Is really, so the slide is really there to help me make a point, not so that people will be sitting there going, wow, that's amazing graphics. You got a really cool build there. The build is only useful if it facilitates making the point. If they go away thinking, wow, I was really captivated by all the swirly cues, but they missed the point of lowering costs, or they missed the point of, we're improving customer experience, or we're getting into a new market. If they miss the point of the curly cues and they focus on the curly cues, actually my slide didn't succeed as much as I thought it did.
It's an irony of the whole interaction, which is the slides really are the backdrop. You're the main event. Your conversation is the main event. They have to be good, no question about it. They can't be sloppy, and they're important, and they live on in the record. But it's really about you owning and commanding that conversation.
That's a good point. And I would say an inverse of that I just thought of, Beth, is that I think more often a slide, if done poorly, people will notice a bad slide, that you misspelled somebody's name. It's unattractive. They'll notice that. But if it's an awesome slide, they're not going to necessarily go, it's an awesome slide, but it's not going to distract them from your point.
Right. That's right. Exactly.
So you can make a bad slide, but it's really, is it properly supporting what you're trying to communicate as a person?
Yep.
Yeah, that's great.
So let's talk about the next one, which is be intentional in how you show up. You do not want to go in and say, I'm here to talk about technology. No, you want to establish yourself in the room as a business leader, because you are. You just happen to be a business leader with deep technical acumen. But every word and every nuance of how you show up in the room and introduce the content and pull through the content should be business led first. So, look at how your peers command the room. Watch the CFO. Very often, they're very effective around distilling the information in business context, right? They're financial. Yes, they address the financials, but they talk about it how? They talk about growth. They talk about risk. They talk about profitability. So show up as a business leader first and foremost, and be very conscious of that. Demonstrate and illustrate your knowledge of the business and how technology enables it, right? That's the unique asset that you bring in that other leaders don't have, right? But you have to make that link explicit.
Yeah, and actually, I was just thinking as you were saying that, when I think about people who impress me as presenters, very often, I hate to say this as a technical guy, very often it's salespeople. But why are salespeople good at presenting? Because salespeople tend to be extroverts. They tend to understand, if they're effective salespeople, it's not about what I have, it's about what you need, right? And so I find that they actually tend to be very good storytellers. They're very good at getting somebody to capture their attention, because they're talking in terms of what that audience member desires, wants, and fears, as opposed to what it is I want, need, like, or fear. And so having that kind of position really makes for a much more compelling argument than one that I'm just sitting there in love with the details of my technology.
I love that suggestion. I'm going to take that myself because you're right. If I think about it, it's true. I think some of the most effective presenters are salespeople. They adapt, they pivot, they adjust based on the engagement of the audience. They lead the flow. It's very natural for how they conduct their presentation. So I think there's a lot there for all of us to leverage.
Absolutely.
Now let's talk about real estate. So for every single slide, literally every word, everything on every single slide, think very, very carefully about that and don't waste any real estate. Again, think of the mind of the board. You're going through hundreds of slides, right? Don't slide into every slide needs a header and a footer, and it needs use every single bit of that slide to your advantage. For example, don't waste one set of insight I got from some of the research I did is, don't waste the title on the title. Make the title what you want the takeaway to be. So you have a slide with a bunch of pie charts and data. Well, make that, instead of using a title that says, here's a bunch of data, whatever, make that title be, the data tells us that A, B, C, D. So be really explicit around every slide that you include, and make sure that it conveys information in business context. With that said, you want that to be able to be something you can launch off of and lead the dialogue, as we said in the previous 3 points. So it's your backdrop, but as a backdrop, make sure it's really effective. Don't make them struggle to figure out, so what's this slide mean to me?
Yeah, and when you make real estate count, in my mind, that doesn't mean use every inch of the slide necessarily. I dealt with a person one time where people were like, you have too many slides. You got to have literally 25% fewer slides. And so you know what the person did? They took 4 slides and put them into one.
That's bad,
They took their 40 slides and put the same 40 slides on 10 slides, 4 slides. And I'm like, that is not what they meant.
And you lose credibility.
Yeah.
So if your content is not thoughtfully prepared and easy to consume and tied to the narrative that you're painting, you lose credibility. Either it's not in business context, or it's visually just too dense, or it doesn't provide the key takeaways that tie to the overall message and storyboard that you're there for. So these things all should stitch together very, very naturally. Again, I use the word friction. You want to minimize the friction on the part of the board members to consume it, and also so that they can put it aside and have a discussion. It's all about the discussion, because why? You want them to make a decision. You need their counsel. You want their approval, whatever it is. So keep orienting back to that.
That's great. As you were saying that, Beth, I was just thinking what I really want as a goal is I want them to engage. Sometimes people are like, let me just get through this and get in and get out of there. So, woo. It's like, no, you want these people to engage. You want them to be thinking, oh my God, that was awesome. Oh my God, tell me more.
Exactly.
Absolutely, I'll do that for you. Tell me what I can do to support you in your endeavor. You want that. When you have the engagement, I find that that is a necessary requirement for getting the support. If I don't have their engagement, it's very tough to get their support. And if I want to get their support, whether it's for budget or approving a course of action I want to take, or even getting them to educationally understand what I'm doing, I'm not going to get that if I'm not engaged. And so to me, that engagement is absolutely critical.
Some of the best board meetings I've ever had, both as a CIO as well as a board member, is when the board members are rolling up their sleeves literally at the table with the management leaders saying, okay, here's how we think we can help here. We have these relationships. We could bring in this expert. I've seen this over here, and you're not on the slides anymore. You are doing some co-creation or joint solutioning, and that is the mark of a high performing board and management team relationship.
Totally agree.
So the next item is, never try very, very hard not to box the board in, right? Don't come in with the fire drill and, we've got to do this, or, everything fails, right? Now, there are always options and alternatives. And there's always mitigating factors. And you probably have done a lot of work to think through all of those. Bring some of that insight into the room. Don't corner the board into, we need a decision on this today, or the sky is going to fall. Like, that never really feels good. All right, boards are very thoughtful, they're very careful, they want to do the right thing for the shareholders, for the investors, for the organization. And they like to see that the options have been considered. They like to understand what other options are available other than we have to do this. And they may, with the right positioning, often will come in with alternative options. So if you really have a fire and something really needs to get done, granted, this is the place to have the conversation, but be thoughtful around how you do it and make sure you articulate that you have done the analysis. What other options are there? Provide some opportunities to desensitize the conversation enough to get to solution mode.
That's a great point. And one of the things that I find often is when you talk about risk management, because very often people are like, I have to do this. If we don't do this,
Yeah.
everything will be on fire. Well, no, it's like, I don't have to do something. It's like, if I need to spend money, well, what if I don't have the money to spend? What happens if I don't? Okay, if I do not renew that license, walk me through what happens. Don't tell me the world comes to an end, because literally the world is not going to come to an end. What is actually going to happen? Well, if we don't renew this license, then this system won't work. Okay, well, what happens if that system doesn't work? Well, if this system doesn't work, we can't electronically process this transaction. Okay, well, can we manually process it? What does that mean? Well, and what it means is not that we can't do something. What it may mean is that instead of being able to do 100 widgets an hour, we can only do 10 widgets an hour. Well, what does that actually mean to us? Does that mean we're going to lose $10,000 an hour? Or does that just mean our customers are going to be inconvenienced, but it's only the people who open trouble tickets, and the reality is it's only 2% of them do. So the reality is I'm going to impact adversely customer service on 10% of my people for 2 days.
And that touches on another principle. Put it in business context. Does it mean we're going to lose revenue? Are we going to have reputational risk? Is it going to be a hit to our profitability? Is it going to be a productivity issue? Like make the connection and also provide those alternatives with that same connection. So pull those same threads that you pulled throughout the rest of these tips. Talk about that in business terms.
Totally agree.
And then finally, the last one is, and I've seen this happen, go back to the beginning here. And one of the first tips was, start with the end in mind, right? Put explicitly what you want out front. And if you get either rejected or approved right away, take the cue and move on. So you read the room. Sometimes they're very busy. They have another agenda item and they're prepared to make a decision. They've done the pre-read. The content is clear. You've done what you had to do. Maybe there was a previous dialogue in the room before you got there. You don't know. But if you're in there to ask for something and the board is ready to approve, let them approve. You don't have to keep going through your content. It can only work against you. Similarly, if there's a signal that says we are not going to take that up today, move on, because you are not going to persuade them. You may get some clarifying questions around, okay, understand, would like to understand, what would be sufficient to bring this back, what's lacking, or, you can get some direction setting either there or maybe better after the meeting. But read the room, listen carefully. When it's time to go, let it go. Be ready to adapt or to exit gracefully.
That's a great point. I know sometimes, it's easy to feel resentment to the board. Like, I spent hours putting this deck together, and it's got so much Mona Lisa-like quality to the excellence of my transition. I had this great story I was going to tell. And now it's like, those jerks, they cut me off, or they didn't, And the thing is, the first impulse is to take it personally. But the reality is, don't take it personally. They're running a business. They're not trying to offend you or insult your style. It's like, hey, we got a big corporation. You're one cog among 100 cogs. Count it good that things are going so good they didn't need to look at your cog today.
Yeah.
Don't take it personally. It's easy to want to do that because they don't know necessarily all the time and effort you spent to getting a statistic together, or to get that transition to work on your slide to blow them away. They don't know. They don't care. Nothing personal. Don't take it personally.
I think that's good advice. And I think sometimes it means that you've done your job effectively, but sometimes it has nothing to do with you or your agenda. There could be external factors. I had one situation one time, I had a very big, important transformational topic to bring to the board. 5 minutes before, my slot comes up, they said, we're not going to get to it. I mean, we had prepared for weeks, right?
Yep.
And, there was no explanation, and it is what it is. I found out later the board had just gotten some notification of an acquisition overture, and so there was just the need to reuse that time for other purposes that were in fact a higher priority. So it's not personal.
Right. Well, I appreciate this, Beth. You've come through some really good tips here. Of all these things, what would you say of these top 10, and they're all really good? What, from your perspective, if somebody was going to take one or two things away from this, what would be the one or two things you really want them to take away on giving an outstanding board presentation?
I think the most important one is where we started, which is that prep work. And that's everything from meet your directors and chairs in advance, practice, pay very careful attention to the content. I think all of these are important, but I think that first one is the best tool that you have in your toolbox to make sure that you have an effective presentation.
No,
And
that,
the second, if there were two, the second one is always show up as a business leader first and use
no,
business language.
that's great. Well, Beth, we really appreciate your time and attention. I think this has been a great set of sessions to talk about a very important topic on how to have ITP be more effective to the board. They have a critical job to do, absolutely essential to business, and the better that they can be at doing this, the more effective they're going to be for IT, and the more effective IT is going to be for their company. So thank you very much, Beth, for attending and giving us this great insight. Thank you, everybody, for listening to these sessions, and we hope to hear from you in the future. And also, if you want to just give a final sort of shout out on what we can do with Sounding Board to help people.
Yeah, thank you, Jerry. It was a fun time. I really love doing these sessions with you, and of course, I'm very passionate about this topic. And so, just a quick note: there's a link after the call where you can find out more. But we have created an offering called Sounding Board, where we provide a customized, personalized session to work with you as a technology executive to prepare and practice and deliver your presentations to the board of directors. So if you want some help, you want to learn a little bit more about this, and some of the things that we've talked about in these episodes resonate with you, give us a ring. You can find me or Jerry, or you can go through the website and learn a little bit more about the Sounding Board offering. Thanks very much for listening, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thanks a lot, and have a great day. Thanks for your time, Beth.